kind of going to do everything slightly differently, not only really, really slightly. And it's quite useful being married to kind of a worship leader because you can kind of manipulate things a little bit. so we're going to. So the plan is I'm going to speak to you for a little bit, and then hopefully that'll lead into kind of a time of meditation, stroke worship, just a short time of worship. Because sometimes I don't know about you, but when I hear someone speak like Dan, then that actually kind of leads me to want to worship a bit more, because you've got something, it's kind of put something in you that you then are ready to give out again a little bit. So that's kind of why we just did a bit differently this week. And I just realised I don't even know what the time is, so someone just wave if I'm going on for ages. I think I'm probably going to be shorter than anything, but we'll see how we go. So what I want to speak on this week is my kind of title. If I was writing a book about this subject, it would be Somewhere Only We Know. Okay, and it is linked to the song, so you can have that going around in your head, that's fine. So it's Somewhere Only We Know, and the we in that is you and God. That's kind of, rather than this we, it's really, I want to talk about, like this is for lots of you know me, and you know the big thing for me is kind of intimacy with God. And actually, like, I tend to have intimate friendships rather than kind of big group friends and things like that. And it's something I'm really passionate about, is that we and God have places that are just us and him, and it's really intimate. And that's where what Dan was talking about, reaching out to people and everything, that comes from that place. And my thoughts kind of began because Adam and I went last Sunday, we went to a different church, and it was on Sunday morning, and they were talking about I don't know, some big name prophets, and I never remember big names and stuff like that, but they were talking about some people who prophesied that this year there's going to be like another revival, like a big international kind of revival. A bit, I mean, I don't know much about Toronto, but along those kind of lines. And I don't really understand all those things, and I wasn't really a Christian at the time of Toronto anyway, and all that sort of stuff. But it's quite exciting. I haven't really got a clue what it is, other than, like, hopefully it means that God's presence will really be huge on earth. That's kind of my understanding of revival. But one thing the man was saying was, he was saying that it might, or it probably, will look differently to how he's done it before. Like, God does things differently, doesn't he? And quite helpfully, when I was reading last night, and I wasn't reading for this, I was just reading myself, God told me to go to Hebrews, and at the beginning of Hebrews it says something along the lines of in diverse ways God has spoken through his prophets over time. It's something like that in Hebrews 1, and I thought that's exactly it. God speaks in different ways. But that also makes me slightly nervous, because then I think, oh my goodness, what if I either miss it, or what if I get it wrong? You know, like the whole Antichrist and all that. What if I just don't know? And I think that's when we have to come back to this intimacy, but we do know. God has put his spirit in us, and there must be. And the verse, it took me ages to find this verse, and I knew it was in the Bible somewhere. In Hebrews 13, verse 8, it says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. And I was just thinking, well, actually, okay, so he might do stuff differently, but he is still him, and he is still the God that we know in those intimate places, and he'll be different to me, how he speaks to me, to how he speaks to Julie. I think that he would do that differently because he knows us differently, and how he speaks to Caroline, but he is still him to us. Like, I suppose it's a bit like I have two older brothers, and my dad is brilliant, and we're really close, and he's close to my brothers too, but he's very different with them to how he is with his little princess. You know, it's totally different. But he is still him. He is still always him. And then I had this other line of thought, running alongside these thoughts about there being a revival. Something that I'm always challenged with is how, if we step out, like Dan was talking about, how if you kind of do practical stuff for God, how you know if that's really of God or if that's you. Do you know what I mean? And I think Elaine and I have kind of talked about this a little bit, that nervousness of what if I step outside of what he actually wants, or it becomes about me, and it becomes in this kind of fearful place. And so that's something that always runs through my head. And there's a parable that really scares me on this front, and God gave me a little bit of a revelation which links to all this kind of intimacy. So I'm just it's in Matthew 25. I'm hoping I'm marked that. I'm going to turn to quite a few places, so you might just want to have a story time and listen. That's fine. Matthew 25, verses 14 to 27. So it's talking about the kingdom of heaven, and this revival as well that's like the kingdom of heaven coming to earth, isn't it? So this is Jesus teaching about the kingdom of heaven. And he says, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you were not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talents in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Okay, so I'll stop it there. So, the reason that scares me is because I've kind of always felt that last one gets a bit of a raw deal. to me, that's where I run a risk. Like I can be quite a fearful person in a lot of ways of stepping outside the box, and I think, oh my goodness, like that poor bloke, at least he held on to the 1. He didn't go and spend it on himself. There's a bit of me. And so I'm not going to really explain that parable, but God showed me something this week which I thought, okay. When he's talking to when the master is talking to that last servant, he says, so the servant said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So that was the servant's opinion of the master. That's what he thought he was like. And so the master says to him, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Now, if you can kind of imagine, what if the master was talking, rather than talking really harshly, what if he was talking in a slightly sarcastic voice, like, you think that's what you knew about me, but maybe you didn't know that about me, or maybe that's not the truth. I'm not saying, because I'm not sure that isn't the truth about this master, but maybe he's pointing out to the servant, well, if that is the truth, and you knew that to be the truth, then you would have acted this way and you didn't. Or maybe that's what you thought about me, but maybe that's not true because you don't know me. And I think that's kind of what I felt God saying to me, that maybe that final servant had nothing to fall back on really knowing the master. Or even actually, there's a chain of thought that I've read about, that I agree with, that if you look at our relationship with God, if you take this as God and us, we talk a lot about being God's servants, but actually there's kind of a hierarchy to how Jesus talks about us. So after servant, then we can step into, like we talk about, being his friend, and after friend, Jesus talks about us as his bride. And actually those are levels of knowing him deeper. So maybe that person was just operating at servanthood, but if they knew him as friend or as bride, they actually know that actually I could have trusted, I could have done something else with his money, and I wouldn't have been scared of the outcome. So I hope so those are my 2 chains of thoughts. I thought what I'd really like to do this afternoon is just spend some time really getting into an intimate place for us with Jesus and remembering some of those intimate places we've been with him before. Okay, but I think if we know that, if we know Jesus Christ, if we know the Master as friend and then as his bride, then we can step out, and then we will be brave enough to do these things. And then we will be brave enough, if revival comes, we'll know and we'll run with it. Because that's exciting, that's kind of good stuff. And it just reminded me of one of my favourite verses, and it's about someone who I believe must have known Jesus really quite well, because it's about his mum. And it says when all the stuff was going on when Jesus was born, and there's all kind of people are visiting and the shepherds and all that, it says in Luke, in amongst all this kind of chaos, but Mary treasured up all these things and kept them in her heart. And that's always really spoken to me, that verse, but I really believe that's what we need to do sometimes, especially when hard times hit, or when we're trying to weigh up, are we doing the right thing or the wrong thing, because we want to get it right, that we've got things treasured up in our hearts that help us know that that's the truth. And so I was thinking, okay, so how is this biblical? Because it can almost sometimes sound irreverent, and I know I run the risk of that sometimes, of I am talking about the God of the universe, and I know that. I am talking about my creator, and I know that. And so I don't belittle those things, but I do believe that because Jesus came, and he came as a man, and God stepped down here, that we're called to that intimacy, that's real. And one of the areas where I thought, because we're like his disciples here on earth, so I was looking at the disciples a bit, and this isn't something I noticed in the Bible. I had it pointed out to me, and I'm very grateful. But I was thinking a bit about Peter, partly because Dan last time was talking about how he can kind of relate to Peter a bit. So I was thinking about Peter and his intimacy. He was someone who was intimate with Jesus, who knew Jesus, and he had, in this somewhere only we know kind of idea, Peter has some places where only he and Jesus knew, or maybe only he and the other disciples knew Jesus. And one of them is, if you imagine, okay, we're on resurrection morning, or maybe not the morning, actually, maybe a few days later, I think it was. It's time of resurrection, and all the disciples are feeling a bit rubbish, a bit like, well, what happened? Where's our hope gone in this? He's gone. And so Peter goes, let's go fishing. And that's what they do. And it's a man that I've heard speak on this before, and he's really like, that's what men are going to do. Men are just going to go fishing. Women would probably go chocolate or something, but men go fishing, right? And so I will just read what it says. So we're on John 21. Okay. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realise that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore in 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So, there are two bizarre things here. This is like the risen God of all creation, and he goes and has breakfast with a load of guys on the shore of Galilee, like cooking up their fish. And actually that might not be the first thing that we would think God would do when he's just defeated the devil and walked out of hell. Or it may not be the first one, but that may not be one of his priorities. But actually for Jesus, one of his priorities was going to see his mates, basically, and having these fish with them on the beach. Which is amazing. And actually that's also, they didn't recognise how he looked. I assume he looked different. They didn't recognise how he looked. But they knew by this act, and by this thing that they did together, this fishing, they knew that this was Jesus. John recognises him as Jesus. And I think the reason why John recognised him as Jesus is if you go back, and at the beginning of Mark, when they first met Jesus, they met Jesus here, when they were fishing on the Sea of Galilee. And this is when he first called them, and he did the same thing again. And they're out in their boat, and he calls them to be fishers of men. And that's a precious place for them. And actually for us, reading this now, the Sea of Galilee isn't a very precious place, particularly, but for Peter and the other guys there who'd been in that boat, that was somewhere only they knew. And when Jesus called them, they knew. Yeah. They knew this is our Jesus. This is what Jesus does when he's with us. Yeah. And they could step forward and then do all the rest of this stuff. Yeah. Because they'd had that moment. They knew that Jesus had called them in Galilee, on the Lake of Galilee, back at the beginning of Mark and stuff. It's the same one at the end of John when he's been resurrected, who calls them again. And they have that intimate place. And I believe they kind of stored that up. They will know the significance of that. Yeah. We can miss it as we read it, but they knew the significance. And then I was also thinking, like, we need these only we know places in the bad times too. And I was thinking again about Peter and when he denied Jesus, when Jesus was on the cross. And I was thinking, I don't know how many other people, when I was reading through this in the Bible, I don't know how many other people knew that Jesus had denied Peter, that Peter had denied Jesus. I mean, the people he was speaking to and claimed they didn't know Jesus, they knew. But I don't know if the other disciples, it doesn't tell us if he went back and told the other disciples, do you know what I did? Or whether he kept that really quiet. Because I think I would keep it quiet. Let's keep that one hush hush. But I don't know, he may have spoken about it. But that was something both he and we know because Jesus was still the God of the universe, Jesus will still know that took place. I'm convinced of it. So the two of them knew that this really dark moment had hit Peter's life. But then also, like later on when he's resurrected again after this, my Bible here says Jesus reinstates Peter, and there's a whole bit where Jesus says to him, Peter, do you love me? And he does it the whole 3 times again to kind of go against the 3 times that Peter denies him. And it also feels slightly public because he does it then. He does this, Jesus does this in front of the other disciples as well, who may not have known really the significance of why that was taking place, but Peter knows. I'm convinced of it. Peter knows why Jesus is doing that, and Jesus knows why Jesus is doing it, and why between the two of them this had to take place.
Yeah.
And just the Bible is actually, as I lay in bed last night, I was thinking, oh goodness, I could go on forever because the Bible, and I won't, don't worry, but the Bible is littered with this stuff. I was thinking, like, I was thinking about kind of Mary. I was thinking about the resurrection. I was thinking when she's gone with the women and they're looking for Jesus and she's devastated he's not there, and then there's this gardener and he speaks to her and she doesn't know it's Jesus, and then he says Mary and he says her name, and I thought actually there's something really powerful when someone says your name, isn't it? And there's something really powerful when someone you know says your name, like when you pick up the phone and it's someone, it's not a cold call for once, it's someone you actually want to talk to, and they say your name, there's like that's okay. And I think for Mary that was only she would know how Jesus said her name and how that made her feel. But Jesus knew that if he spoke her name, that's when she'd be like, this guy who doesn't look like my Jesus is my Jesus. And that was really intimate for her again. And there are just, there are loads in the Bible. When you start looking, you think, there are so many intimate moments. And I really think that's why we need to be like Mary. We need to have those moments. And we do have those moments, but we need to notice those moments. And we need to treasure them up in our heart. And then from that place, that's where we step out forward. And we don't have to, some of them you share and some of them are just for you. I think particularly the really dark ones are probably just going to be for you, and that's okay because it's between you and God and no one else needs to know where that power comes from for you to step forward. But you have that intimate place with him. And sometimes I think also we don't acknowledge that he was there. And I think if you've got times when you think, well, he wasn't there, and I don't know what Andrew's talking about really because we haven't got these somewhere only we know, he wasn't present. And then I think I would ask him to somehow show you because he will have been.
Yeah.
And if when you see where he was present in that, that's when it changes everything. Yeah. That's when you have that intimacy and then you can step out and then you don't have to be that servant who didn't know him and was too afraid. Because afraid is just crippling. So I'm going to share with you, because I thought, well, I hope it's kind of making sense. I'm going to share with you one of my somewhere only he and I know moments, and that'll be somewhere only we know moments. But that's fine. That's not. It's not the most kind of intimate. It's kind of cute, and I like it. I'm not going to give you my whole testimony. Basically, I sort of became a Christian when I was 5, but I didn't. I did start going to church, but no one really took me under their wing. I didn't, so I was only knowing as much as really I know now. The Holy Spirit kind of revealed to me as I went along. I had no real teaching or anything. And anyway, and so this is kind of there is a little background to this somewhere only we know moment because I did believe in God and I prayed and I knew there was something there, but that was as far as I could go. I knew no more. I didn't know why Jesus. I knew Jesus had come, but I didn't know why and things like that. Anyway, I'd had a fight with my brother, as you do, and I think I'm about 7 at this point. And I'd had like a fight. My brother, when we were children, had quite a sharp tongue, shall we say, and I'm quite passive. So I must have been really upset. And I wrote this letter that I have in my hand now, which is really precious to me. And I put it on my windowsill, and basically, you probably can't see, but it's a nice big pink felt tip, and there is a stamp, and it says God, okay? And then it says to number 1, heaven, which is spelt wrong, and then I just wrote heaven every time, and then even like my little postcode is in separate letters, so it's like heaven, but it's like separate, like you write a postcode. So there you go, that's my note that God knew I was going to like cute, right? And then inside, in my cute little notelet, that I probably had for writing thank you cards or something, it says, Dear God, please let somebody help me. I need help. I hope I'm not being selfish. Amen. Because I know when you finish talking to God, you say amen, don't you? That's kind of... And then, so I think I'm about 7, and I wrote this, and it really wasn't that dramatic. I had just had a fight with my brother. That was all this was. But I sound quite desperate, don't I? But I was thinking, and then I put it in my little envelope, and I put it on my windowsill, and I'm sure she didn't look, but I know my mum knew it was there. But no one other than me and God knew what was in this notelet. And actually, when I came older and I and I read it again. I thought, my goodness, God knew that I was going to write this letter. I believe now, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, and this is a bit mind-blowing, but he knew that there was this little girl, in whatever it was, 1987, I guess, going to write this thing saying, please let somebody help me.
Yeah.
And he had already sent Jesus.
Yeah.
And that is really precious. He had already sent somebody to help me, and in the years to come I was going to find that out. And that to me, that's this massive, somewhere only God and I knew moment when I was set. He knew the cry of that little girl's heart. But the whole point of sharing that really with you is that he knows the cry of your hearts too, and he knows the cries of the people out there's heart. That there are these intimate moments with God happening all the time that maybe are not being noticed, or maybe the people out there, and including us sometimes, we don't realise that's what's going on. We don't realise he's present, but we need to step back and notice, and we need to help other people to notice that he's there.
Yes.
And what I really just wanted to do now is just, I'm hoping that maybe your mind might be beginning to go to places where God has been just with you, or places where you wish he was and you want to know if he was there. But really, just to bring yourself, if you've been a Christian any length of time, there will be times when you think, I know that he acted in that moment. I know that even if it may not have been the outcome I was looking for, but he was just, I'm not even really talking about outcomes particularly, it's just knowing his presence, that's really enough. Like the whole psalmist says about, like one day is in your courts, it's better than 1,000 elsewhere. It's that moment in his presence. And I kind of asked Adam, I'll have to go and take Griff, he's gonna play that song, the Somewhere Only We Know song, because it really speaks to me, and I find it like a worship song. And there is, if you look at the words, there is kind of Christian imagery in there, which is probably a sort of accident, but I think we can use it anyway. And I would join in and sing it if you want to, and sing it as a worship song, and thank God for those Somewhere Only We Know moments, or just like let your mind kind of go to those times, because I think we can take like 5 minutes or whatever here to be ready to go out there again, and to have just remembered those moments, to step aside from that busyness and the craziness and remembered those moments. So join in and sing if you want to, or just listen as well.
The song is really hard. My voice is actually bear with me.
I walked across